Okay guys, so this is pretty exciting. Not only do we have a unit that isn't another Green Axe Infantry unit, but there's some pretty good seals and some stuff to talk about. So let's jump right in.
Let the lesson begin.
What's up guys, Akariss here, bringing you another Fire Emblem Heroes video. Today's video is going to talk about the Freebie Sophia from the latest Halloween banner. Now I am still going to likely do a should you pull video, which might be tomorrow or the day after. Just kind of depends. Might do weapon refines. I still want to do a G Duel cavalry video. There's some stuff to talk about, but I feel like this is definitely one of the more exciting things because this applies to everyone, so why not? First thing I want to mention is actually the sacred seals that come with this batch and Sophia are Odd Defense Wave and Shield Session, which in my opinion are both actually good. Odd Wave seals may seem like something that aren't really worth talking about, but you got to realize that I've actually been waiting for stuff like Odd Wave seals for quite a while, because characters like that use blade tomes, or let's say like Thunderhead Olwen, use those seals really well, or their partners use those seals really well, combined with like 7 slot or restore to set up some really cool things. So I am actually pretty excited about that. I feel like shield session could be pretty good, probably in a lot of places, potentially arena or AR defense or AR offense, but I'll wait to actually see that in action before I give it more thought. For the time being though, we're going to talk about Sophia in this video and likely what you can do with her and why she's more interesting than your, well, Red Tome Infantries or Green Axe Infantry freebies, right? So there's definitely some stuff to talk about here. All right, with that being said, before we jump in, smash the like button, sub if you haven't already, always helps the channel, makes me make sure you get this content that hopefully helps you make good informed decisions with the intent. That's basically the intent of the channel, and I hope you get something out of that. So thank you guys. All right, so first things first, we are going to talk about Sophia or Fodder and what it all means. Now, since we don't have confirmation on the new Halloween Sophia stat spread just yet, I am going to be a bit speculative here, and I make sure that I make my speculations a bit conservative, but generally they are right. The past few that I've done have been a few points here or there off, but generally speaking, IS is pretty predictable with how they do these things. I will base the analysis based on that, and if I feel like something needs to be corrected, then just look for it in the comments below if I'm way off, or possibly a Twitter or some post like that where I'll correct it. But generally speaking, my speculations have been pretty good so far with stuff like Nana and anyone before that. I believe I got Legend of Micaiah as well. So I'm pretty confident in these speculations, and therefore I can release these videos. IS doesn't really stray away from the origins of these units too much. So OG Sophia is the basis for what I think Halloween Sophia stat spread will be, which is, as you can see, a fairly min-maxed unit where she dumps speed and gets a lot of bulk and high attack. You might not think 33 attack was that high, but actually back in 2017, that was one of the higher attack stats. And as we saw in the video, she had 40 HP, so minus that by 3, and you actually have a 37 HP Sophia, which is actually kind of interesting because that does mean that more points go into other things. I will be surprised if she ends up with a high speed stat, but if she does, that doesn't necessarily make her a bad unit. In fact, it would probably still make her a good unit, just with slight alterations to the builds that I will showcase here. I'll mention that stuff, but generally speaking, this is how I feel confident in it happening. Now, the fodder that she comes with is going to be Attack Res Form 3, Sabotage Res 3, Ardent Sacrifice, and a brand new Blue Tome Inheritable. The Blue Tome Inheritable is actually pretty strong. It gives you attack 5 on her with a pretty easy condition, debuffs foes by 5 attack, and has a guard built in. That helps a lot for certain builds that you may want to use, which we'll talk about in a moment. And of course, as an inheritable, it's pretty solid. She also has Sabotage Res 3, which is decent fodder to potentially use on your support units. But that's not all. Let's talk into the builds themselves and how I feel like you could potentially be using her. So these are sample builds that we'll talk about here, and if you're not actually familiar with what Pack Blooms does, that was the tome that I believe Valentine's Veronica had earlier in the year. That's like essentially what Henriette has. It's also a very strong tome, and I would actually recommend it in most cases, even over Spider Plush, but Spider Plush is a solid option anyways, depending on the scenario. I feel like you'd want to use Spider Push when you're using like a solo, whereas you probably want to use Pack Blooms if you're going to use like a stance 3, so you get like a guard effect on either, or something like Close Reversal could synergize well with Spider Push. The healing off of the Blooms weapon is pretty solid. So, shown on the left here, I have opted for more of a safety kind of tank builds where you use IO's shield, use the rain skills, and unfortunately range flyers don't have too many good options in B scale. It's basically limited to something like Trace, but Quick Riposte should work pretty well. Mind you, if she does actually end up being speed favored for whatever reason, IS does throw that little switcheroo on us, that's totally fine, and even QR in the B slot is okay because you'd still want to run it in speed builds to make sure that you're beating impact units where they would otherwise deny your double. So I feel like just stacking her bulk as much as possible will be really good. In a meta that's full of like wind sweeps, legendary Sigurds, and oppressive red units like Dual Lift in general, she doesn't fall off too bad as a potential tank and has some really good synergy with some ally heroes that I will show in a moment. Also, this is our first like real freebie when it comes to Blue Tome Flyers. The red one was basically a Versa. We don't have a green one yet, I don't think. There have been 4-star seasonal focuses from what I remember, but I don't really like recommend or offer that sort of thing. If you can just save grails and build a unit off of that, that doesn't cost you orbs, and it's a good way to go about it. So as an arena unit, she does end up potentially rounding out your core if you end up playing like that. With guidance, trace, B Duel Flying 4, join drive attack, and ideally a stat spread like that, she will actually be pretty solid as an option to bring around in arena to make your life a lot easier. There are other tome options as well that I haven't shown here. You could definitely opt for something like a blade tome, maybe a nuker build. You could go for even supportive blue tomes, such as the one that Ninian, I believe Bridal Ninian has, just to give like buffs and such, or even Silver Goblet supporting your allies with stuff like Ward Flyers or Silver Goblet. But those are all different types of builds that I don't feel like have a solid place, when obviously a dancer just doing that is probably going to be better. But nonetheless, you can also consider stuff like that. What I want to talk about though is definitely potential allies that synergize really well for air offense and just mages in general. So to start this off, we will mention, actually if you saw it earlier, Hilda. So the problem with like the mages is they don't have like a very good comparison or support unit like Lancina. So if you end up running like Ruptured Sky, Noontime builds or something like that, you want someone who can accelerate those specials. So if you remember what Dual Hilda does, is she's actually a fairly solid support here by having the Sunshade Staff, which is shown under me here. Probably a bit small, so we'll just make that bigger there. But essentially, it's a form of special acceleration, which really helps to fire off those specials and secure those kills, especially something like Ruptured Sky. Additionally, Hilda's actually solid support because she can wear that Ward Flyers in the C slot, run Distant Guard, and the weapon itself gives additional attack, which is always really nice to have. And speed, I think, maybe? Or maybe it's her. It doesn't really matter right now. Moving on though, I do also recommend something like Flame, really to reduce all forms of damage as much as possible. Same idea, flyers work really well together by being able to stack Ward Flyers. This is a really original strategy. OG strat that I used to use back in older AR, and I do feel like some units can still run it to basically minimize damage as much as possible. The thing with flyers, unfortunately, is they cannot protect their allies the same way armors can with save skills, and that is like a giant detriment, along with the fact that their B skill options, especially ranged flyers, are just kind of limited in that regard. But if you can pull it off on some teams, you will get massive amounts of defense and res, potentially attack and speed, and make your life a lot easier. As a final support option, and probably one that's less desirable, you could consider NY Valoria. This is Flame's staff. If you forgot what it is, it's just basically damage reduction. But there is NY Valoria as well as a solid partner. She doesn't have that flyer synergy, and unfortunately she shares blue with Sophia, making your team comps probably less synergistic. But generally speaking, she's also a decent partner because, again, special acceleration is one of the biggest problems with something like tome users, and to a lesser extent dragons, but they can use Steady Breath at the very least. So if you have any of those, then the synergy is there and will make units like this much more consistent for AR offense. And finally, as I said, as an arena unit, she probably shines the most there by being able to use Trace, Guidance, and being very bulky, likely to be able to take hits from lots of stuff. You could even consider something like a Wind Sweep build and run stuff like Wolf Tome, which could definitely work as well. Maybe even for air offense, but again, I didn't want to show all those different variations because with tomes you really do have a lot of flexibility and it's more about picking the right role in your team comp. I wanted to give Sophia the due diligence and show her as the main attraction as opposed to being some sort of support or niche pick. Alright guys, that basically is my coverage of Sophia. I'm happy to cover units like this, although she may not be like amazing just from like a, first impression, just like looking at her right away. At least it's better than another Green Axe Infantry or Red Tome Infantry. That Green Axe Infantry or Red Tome Infantry with no preference weapon. She doesn't have a preference weapon, but at least she has Fodder, probably a decent stat spread, and a new unit type that is definitely free. It's just like Flying Nana, which I did appreciate when we got that as well. So I'm glad to see this. And yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Smash the like button, sub if you haven't already. If you love this content, consider the Patreon description below. It keeps it flowing, and I do appreciate it if you do give something back. It means a lot. That's it for me, guys. See you in the next one. Much love. Peace.
It's over.